Hello everybody, my name is Cheyenne Taylor, and Jessica and I are going to be talking to you about Chapter 4, Positive Classroom Discipline. So let's go ahead and get started. So what is positive classroom discipline? Frederick Jones began investigating classroom management strategies in the 1970s, and he continued all the way up until 2007. And some of his findings were that instruction can only occur in a well-controlled classroom, massive wastes of time by students talking to their neighbors were taking place, and teachers were focusing on eliminating undesired behavior without a plan to increase desired behavior. So Jones stresses that an effective classroom management system must be positive, economical, self-eliminating, low-key, supportive, and almost invisible. Positive classroom discipline focuses on the management of group behavior. Four main components are classroom structure, limit setting, responsibility training, and backup systems. And so we're going to be talking about these four things more in depth. And so if you were to do a positive classroom discipline management style in your classroom, these are the steps on how you would achieve that. And it's on page 64 in our textbook. So you can arrange your classroom for maximum proximity control, establish rules, employ limit setting, provide backups, train students to have responsibility, provide preferred activity time or PAT, and use omission training for individual students. And so we're going to talk about classroom structure. Jones describes it as the centerpiece of classroom management. So it's a proactive step that prevents the majority of disruptions. So there are some issues to consider, which include arranging the furniture and creating classroom rules and procedures. Proximity control is management by walking around. So this management should allow for maximum teacher mobility, physical proximity, and moment-to-moment accountability for students. There must be walkways so that the teacher can reach each student quickly. And the best possible room arrangement is the one that puts the least amount of distance and the fewest barriers between the teacher and any student or area in the classroom. So here we have effective and ineffective arrangements, which are on page 65 in your textbook. And so here if we look at this is an ineffective, so it's a traditional classroom with limited walkways. There's only so many ways that you can go, and you'd have to fight to get to certain students. And then here you have Jones's model, which has quite a few walkways. All the students are spaced and closer to the teacher, unlike here where the teacher's in the back and unable to reach all of the students easily. Okay, moving on to limit setting. So a quote by Jones is, "Rules define limits, but they do not establish limits." So limit setting is where teachers systematically teach students that they mean business, or it's rule enforcement. So body language allows the teachers to protect students from embarrassment while dealing with the behavior. So students, you don't have to say, "Quit goofing off." You teach them by being assertive but never aggressive, and it's to calm the students and get them back on task. So there are some limitations with this as well. The teacher has to remain calm. If the teacher gets upset easily, then the students are just going to do it to push buttons. The teacher needs a good relationship with students. They must wait out their students and not leave too quickly. So if a student goes and is acting out, and the teacher looks at them and then follows through the rest of the 6 steps and leaves too quickly, the student realizes that they just have to wait out the teacher, and then they can go back to goofing off. The teacher can't be trapped behind a desk. That's another important part about walkways, is so that way the teacher can go and get into each of the students' space quickly, so that way this will work. The interruption from limit setting can be seen as a break for students who are bored. Teachers must be aware of what's going on in the classroom. The entire class cannot be off task, or standing by a desk will do little to help. If your entire class is goofing off, then standing by one desk is not going to do anything. And if a student is agitated or aggressive, moving into their space can be seen as a threat. Okay, so limit setting starts with these 6 steps. You need to have eyes in the back of your head, terminate instruction, turn, look, and say the student's name, walk to the edge of the student's desks, prompt. And so prompt is where you get eyeball to eyeball with the student, and the student should be given a prompt, a message that tells the student what to do next. The prompt might be moving work around in front of the student, pointing to the work to be done, or verbally telling the student to get back on task. And then once the student has complied, the teacher should thank the student and move away. But if that doesn't work, then you move on to palms, where you lean slowly across the desk and place both palms flat on the far side of the desk on either side of the student. Remain eyeball to eyeball with the student until he or she complies. And if the student backtalks during any of this process, as students do, or if 2 students or more are involved, then you add camping out in front, which is where if a student backtalks, you camp out in front. So Jones describes the golden rule of dealing with backtalk as doing nothing or waiting out the student. When the student stops talking, the teacher should give a prompt, wait, and move away. The teacher should never move out until confident that that child or student has begun work. And if it's multiple students engaging in this behavior, then you camp out from behind, where you use the wide walkways and move around the desk to stand between the students. Leaning on the table of the first student, as described in prompt, step 5, it blocks the view of the second student. You should totally ignore the second student and establish eye contact with the first. Wait until that student is back on task. Only when the first student is working is it time to focus on the second student. So it just works because the students want the teacher out of their space, because students are constantly testing their limits that the teacher has set. And so this is just important steps to go through and realize, and like how to get your students back on task. Okay, next is responsibility training. So responsibility training is using group incentive program. It's a group incentive program, and it's the accountability that students have for and to each other, where the teacher is taken out of the enforcer, or as the textbook says, the nagging parent role. And so incentives encourage students to follow classroom rules, and every incentive system should have 3 parts: a task that you want completed, a reward that they get if completed, and a system of accountability. And so it talks about grandmama's rule, where your grandmother might say, finish your dinner and then you get dessert. It also talks in the textbook, this is on page 71, it talks about incentive programs versus bribes, like bribing your students, like, oh, if you do this, I'll give you a piece of candy, can sometimes be seen as a bribe. But on page 71, it says that a proactive incentive program, such as responsibility training, is an exchange that is established in advance and is therefore not a bribe. It is planned as a normal part of the day. However, a reactive system is established in the heat of the moment and should be considered a bribe. And so responsibility training is all about getting your students to want to work and to have that accountability for each other and for themselves. And so the last one is a backup system. So most behavior can be deterred by limit setting and responsibility training, but some students will force negative sanctions. There are 3 levels of backup responses. So there's small backup responses, which are done privately, usually without other students knowing, and it's more communicative. So it would be, an example is putting finger to your lips or speaking privately to the student, catching their eye. And then a medium response is public, but it's within the classroom, such as a timeout, and it's more punitive than corrective. Then large responses require help outside of the classroom and at least 2 professionals. So if you were going to send a student to detention. So it's hierarchical, this backup system. It's systematic as well. It's a systematic hierarchic organization of negative sanctions. So you have to work your way up. You start, everybody's on the same level. Then you go to the small responses. If it continues, you go to medium. If that continues, then you go to large. So as you work up the levels with students, the consequences not only become more severe, but more professional assistance is involved. And so just a summary of the 4th step, it is on page 73. So Jones proposes a 4-component model that includes classroom structure, limit setting, responsibility training, and backup systems. So teachers need to be proactive by setting limits through rules and procedures. And when they're challenged, you use limit setting as a first line of defense. And you put in place a reward system to be proactive, which is responsibility training. And in case all of those don't work, you have backup systems already in place. So you're not flying by the seat of your pants. You already have all of this prepared. So now Jessica is going to go into the rest of the chapter. Thank you.
Hi everyone, this is Jessica Maybrier. I'm doing my presentation on the second part of Chapter 4, Positive Classroom Discipline. Strategies for dealing with difficult students. The first thing it talks about is consistency, how being consistent is very important with dealing with students because it allows them to know what is expected of them. The next thing is omission training. Omission training is an incentive program system that rewards the omission or avoidance of unwanted behavior. During this, the teacher rewards the individual students for behaving appropriately, and the class is also rewarded when the student is on task. It goes in to talk about the steps. It says the establishment of an omission training program requires that the teacher perform the following. Remove the defiant student from responsibility training so the class is no longer being punished for the student's inappropriate behavior. Talk to the student in a non-public place about the student's behavior. Establish an individual reward program for the student. Announce to the class that the student is now on an individual program. However, when the student earns time or reward, the reward is shared with the entire class. Withdraw the student from omission training as the student learns appropriate behavior and is more accepted by the group. And then the last thing it talked about was the interaction. So the student interaction with the teacher. When confronted with a belligerent student, the teacher should do nothing. If this teacher responds with anger or harsh words, the student has succeeded. The teacher's waiting and remaining silent does not mean that the action will not occur. Waiting simply gives the teacher time to think before acting and maintaining professionalism. The teacher's calmness and skill can have a constructive end. Once the student has calmed, the teacher should have a conversation with the student outside the presence of peers. If the behavior continues to occur, then the teacher may want to implement a technique from Jones's backup system. I know when I first read that was hard for me to believe that when a student is acting that way, that it's best to just remain silent or be calm and just kind of ignore the behavior at that moment. But then once I read on and I guess I thought about it, it kind of made more sense. And then Jones's backup system, and this is in the book. So in the book on page 73, it gives examples of responses. It has a small backup response, and that one's done privately between the student and the teacher. It has medium backup responses, and that's public within the class. And then it has large backup responses, and that's public and requires 2 professionals. And you can kind of read what falls under each. And like I said, that's on page 73 in the textbook. So I'll go back over here. Guess I'm gonna have to click on it today. Positive classroom discipline. Some strengths it talks about is that this discipline is grounded in behavioral research. Jones specifies a set of steps or activities to follow when dealing with discipline problems. This provides a structure for the action of the teacher. It informs us to knowing how to, in addition to knowing about, which is critical for teacher success in controlling a classroom. It encourages teachers, administrators, and parents to work together to combat discipline problems, which I think that one is very important. And then it also has some weaknesses that goes along with it. Middle and high school students may become aggressive in response to this approach. The approach may force a confrontation that neither the teacher nor the student wants. Student independence is not encouraged. The use of the student to keep fellow classmates in line can create problems rather than solve them. Resentment and revenge may be the result. So I think it's really important if you're going to use this system to just make sure that you vocalize with your class that we're doing this to help this disciplined student create more of a positive approach. We're not trying to bring them down, or we're not using, we're not going to keep bringing up their past discipline or anything like that. It's kind of to help them, so we want to encourage them. And then it says, Jones's insist that instruction should be stopped when discipline problems arise may actually create a problem in some classrooms. Some students may encourage each other to disrupt the class just so instruction will cease. I think with this, you just kind of have to know your students and just kind of watch what they're doing and how they're using this. So in the book, it talks a little bit more about Jones. It told about how he wrote his first book in 1987. Teachers have come to appreciate what Jones has to say about classroom management as much as they appreciate his classroom management system. And then the book tells some quotes that they've said, that he has said. This is on page 75. I just picked out 3, but there's actually more than that on that page. The first one says, "It takes 1 fool to back talk. It takes 2 fools to make a conversation out of it. Discipline management is an indoor sport. Basketball players know how to fake, and poker players know how to bluff. Students know how to do both at the same time. Goofing off is its own reward. Goofing off is always the easy, pleasurable alternative to being on the ball." And then the last thing on my presentation is key terms. So if you are taking notes, you may just want to write some of these down. They're also in the back of the book. I just wrote the key terms from this chapter and the pages that they are on. And that is all.